Still eat too much, but I eat a lot less than I used to eat. And I started going to meetings and learning about gratitude. And I learned that gratitude is really at the heart of everything. And I thought, well, who am I most grateful to? I mean, who's really done the most for me? Obviously, my parents. And my parents were getting old. They were not by any means hard up, but they were getting old and they were lonely, and they were losing their mobility little by little. And so I made a vow that I was going to go visit them once a month and just hang out with them. Just talk to them, listen to them, hear what they had to say, hear their stories. So I started just flying from LA to Washington, D.C., where my parents lived, and just hanging out with them. They were at first bewildered. What's he doing here? What does he want? But I would just sit there with them like a dog. I mean, who doesn't like a dog? If anyone here doesn't like a dog, you're in trouble. And I would just sit there, and my mother would tell her stories about growing up in a very, very small town in upstate New York during the Great Depression. Her father had died when she was very young, and how hard that was and how difficult, and her great times going to college at Barnard in New York City during the Great Depression, how much she had enjoyed that even though it was during the Great Depression. And my father would tell his stories about having to work and try to get all kinds of jobs during the Great Depression. And the happiest day he ever had, lying in his college bunk at Williams College, listening to the 1931 World Series on the radio. And I would just listen to them, and they would tell these stories over and over. And my father would talk about what it was like being in the Navy during World War II, and just blood-curdling stories. My father, for most of the rest of his life, lacked hearing in one ear because of that. But I mean, that's small change compared with what many people went through in that war. And I would just listen to these stories over and over again. And my parents got to really look forward to my coming there, and they would save up their stories, their anecdotes, and we would have a great time. And I would drive them over the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, and we'd drive down to Easton, Maryland, and Oxford, Maryland, or else we'd drive over to the Hunt Country and go to the Plains or Middleburg, and just have a great time. And nothing spectacular. I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm not Freud. I couldn't figure out anything deep about them, but just kept them company and repaid to them some of what they'd done for me. And I kept thinking to myself, no, my father was quite a famous economist. He was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for Mr. Nixon and Mr. Ford. And I was a young speechwriter at the White House. I was one of the youngest people on the staff. And I would often call him up with a question: can you find out how much GNP per capita has increased since 1944, or something like that? And I would always say to him, don't do it if you have anything more important to do. And I would think, well, wait a minute, he's the chief economic advisor to the president, possibly he does have something more important to do. My father would never say that. He would always say, what's more important than helping my one and only son? And I don't remember my father ever turning me down when I asked him for anything, except in high school I wanted a Corvette. He would not give me a Corvette. Believe me, I haven't forgotten. Anyway, so I would stay with them, and at the beginning of 1997, after I'd been doing this about 9 years, my mother wrote me a note. She said, I never thought anyone would pay so much attention to me. You cannot imagine how this has redeemed my life. I can't thank you enough. And I was thinking, this is great. This is great. This is what I always want to do. I've screwed up so many things. You know, it's interesting. When they do these introductions for me and show little video clips of me, if they showed you the video clips of the bad things I had done, that would be really interesting. I mean, you cannot imagine I've done this many good things and this many screwed up, difficult, crazy things. And I thought I'm doing something right. And I really look forward to many more years of doing that. And then my mother had a heart problem in 1997. I flew there to Washington. She was dead by the time I got there. I felt terrible, but as I sat by her graveside, I thought I did something right. I paid something back. Then my father was lonely, desperate. He'd never even been out on a date with another woman besides my mother. He was so devoted to my mother that if he walked down the street and saw a beautiful woman passing by, he would avert his eyes. It was amazing. And he was devastated. He was so alone. So I got an apartment down the street from him in Foggy Bottom in Washington, and I stayed with him and kept him company. My wife was very, very indulgent about my being away from home so much. And just little by little, he would tell the stories and cry and tell the stories and cry. And little by little, he started to come out of his shell, and he and I would go for rides. And then he met a woman at the funeral of a friend of his and started going to symphonies and concerts and plays and operas with her. And he was happy again. He had company. And he fell madly in love with this woman. And he would call me up gushing like a schoolboy about this. And on my birthday in 1998, he sent me a fax. Because he was a frugal sort of fellow. He sent me a fax for my birthday. And it didn't do a damn bit of good because the IRS took it all when he died anyway, and 55% of it. He said, for the happy birthday to the best son in the world, my support, my advisor, my confidant, my best friend. And I was so happy. I thought, wow, this is great. He's never turned me down. He's been so good to me all my life, and I'm paying it back. So we had a lot of fun. And then one day, July 25th, 1999, he called me and said, I'm in the hospital. I had severe chest pain last night. He said, you don't need to come, but I'd like it if you did. So I immediately came there, so did my sister. We stayed with him. He got sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker, as people tend to do in hospitals. And now if you could get some software called medical intelligence, then we're really concerned. And that's very much needed. And or just called medical stop killing your patients software. Anyway, and I stayed with him for about 6 weeks. It just got worse and worse and worse. Occasionally he'd have a rally, but little by little he was getting worse. And I would just sit with him. I would watch the TV with him. I'd read him stories from the sports section of the Washington Post. He was, poor guy, he was an avid Redskins fan. How I wish he could see them this season. It would make him so happy. Anyway, he got sicker and sicker and sicker. And my sister came down and she stayed with him. And we both talked to him. And I would think, there's this guy who's taken care of me all my life. I don't mean financially, but taken care of me all my life, and been with me and been my bulwark against any kind of problem. He's fading out. What am I going to do? And one day, at the beginning of September, the doctors came to us, my sister and me, and said, he can't make it. We're going to give him an overdose of morphine, and that'll be it. And I said, well, I don't want you to do that, but if you really feel his condition is hopeless, he's in a coma by now, take him off life support. So they said, we're going to do that, and he'll be gone in about 5 minutes. So my sister and I sat there in the room with him, each one holding a hand. I was holding his right hand, my sister was holding his left hand. And we were reading him the Psalms, and I kept thinking, what am I going to do? I mean, what am I going to do without my father? And this was by this time I was already doing Win Ben Stein's Money, and I was thinking, what am I going to do? And then a sudden thought came to me. I thought, my father has given my sister and me this final gift of letting us take care of her, by which he is showing us that the torch has been passed and we're now able to take care of him and ourselves. And we'll get by. And the needles went down and down, the dials went down and down, and then a nurse came in and said, he's gone. And we felt terrible, sick, just awful. And I inherited their apartment at the Watergate, and I kept it pretty much as it was when they were there. And I go there a lot, and I just look at their notes to each other and their cards to each other and the gifts they gave each other and the books and the articles that my father wrote in profusion, and they're all scattered still all around the apartment. And I think to myself, this is what it's about, caring for one another. And it starts in the family. It starts in the family. And from that apartment, I have a wonderful view over Northern Virginia, and I can see to the grave site of John F. Kennedy. And I can, at night, if it's a really clear night, I can see the tiny little flicker of the eternal flame in front of John F. Kennedy's grave. And that, it seems to me, ties in with the caring for your family, and that leads to caring for the community. And it all was summed up, and caring for the country and caring for the world, healing the world. What it all comes down to is something that John F. Kennedy said, and I was very privileged to hear him say it when I was a 16-year-old boy in Washington, D.C., coming down to the inaugural of John F. Kennedy on a very cold day, January 20th, 1961. And he said words that I think should guide us in every situation. And they are, we love this great country. We love our fellow man. We ask God to help us and to go to work for this great country and for our fellow man. But here on earth, God's work is our work. Thank you very, very much for letting me talk to you.